My name is Irene Hediger, and I'm heading the Artists in Labs program. That's a program situated at the Zurich University of the Arts, and it's a program that brings artists and scientists together. And this, in the context of scientific institutions and their research. This can be a laboratory, it can be a research group, but it can also be in the field. And what's quite exceptional is that we are situated in an arts university, but we are actually working with groups in mostly natural sciences, but also more and more in humanities, and really aiming to have a dialogue between artists and scientists that are organized in very different ways, have their own communities, and specifically science is organized in institutions. So it's quite difficult for artists to access scientific laboratories. And this is where we come in, we facilitate, and we prepare residencies, because these collaborations with scientists is organized in residencies and kind of fellowships. My role in Fungi Cosmology is kind of defined by how it was approached and how it is organized. So we have curators. I'm one of the curators in the Fungi Cosmology project. And then we have artists and we have scientists. But because of the setting, like being a whole group, coming together, going to different places, you kind of also are more like fluid in your kind of role. And when I first thought about this project and about the kind of conditions and also the kind of framework it has, I really started to ask myself, okay, what can that be? What kind of research could I conduct in this kind of setting? And for me, it was clear to think about like what is curating in a context like that, and how in a very different setting, how do I perceive my role, and what are the kind of questions that are coming up for me in the role, and where can I also shift into something more hybrid, where it's not so clearly defined, and where you kind of explore also different ways of creating something new, or even coming up with new knowledge in terms of like the field of curation now for me, but also in the field of how groups work together, and specifically in groups where there are very different perspectives coming together. What are the dynamics, and how can you kind of together and apart also go towards having or gaining a new understanding. Fungi cosmology was actually an idea born here in South America, and maybe more precise, it started off like in two countries, like Maria Luisa, who is the curator from the Chilean side. She was thinking about doing projects about fungi, and at the same time also Lilian in Brazil was also thinking about doing a project with artists and scientists and fungi. So what they did, they approached Pro Helvetia, the Swiss Arts Council Pro Helvetia in South America, and Pro Helvetia then kind of took this role in connecting both. And from there it really started. So Lilian came to Switzerland and met me, and we were discussing, and we as the Artists in Labs project, it was kind of an interesting match, because all of us, like Maria Luisa, Lilian, they both run art science projects also since a long time. So with the Artists in Labs project coming in, and we at the time also working on fungi, it was so interesting to think about this project coming together. Fungi for me is a very interesting organism. And as we know now, it's a kingdom. I've been since many years. I love to be in the woods. I love to be just strolling around finding fungi. So it was more like my relationship to fungi is more or has grown more in terms of like finding fruiting bodies and having a really fantastic meal, but also observing where they in the system of like the mountains. I'm spending a lot of time. I could observe for the last 20 years how also there are movements, and because of interventions of human beings, because of how we work with alpine regions, how the farming, the cattle, and so on. I could really observe that there are changements where certain fungi are growing or not growing anymore. So it's for me also very interesting to kind of in this stretch or in this piece of forest that I'm very often, to kind of have this long-term observation how things change, also certainly influenced by climate change. And I've always been fascinated by, because I was aware that's the fruiting bodies, but there is a whole system under the soil. And this is something I find very fascinating to kind of know more, to explore more. But I don't think I have this, sometimes I'm also very critical about this kind of a bit hype of everybody is now talking about fungi, and how can we exploit in a way as well the fungi, which I find difficult, because it seems to me that we are not willing to kind of step back in certain things, in consumption, in thinking about how we can consume less, or how we can, do things differently, but how can we use fungi for materials, for the whole design industry and so on. So it has this double, there are a lot of questions now that are very interesting and I sometimes think as soon as the focus of human beings goes into something, it's not always clear with what kind of consciousness are we doing this. And this is for me a big question here as well, and to have a community to discuss this as well. And also the kind of hope we as human beings put into an organism that we know very little about. So all our narratives, our hopes, our dreams kind of go into this organism. And this is for me a different level of also for me exploring more, because fungi are everywhere. They're part of us, they're in us, it's not just something when I go, of course, looking for the fruiting bodies, for the mushroom, of course, I'm not thinking about, that I have it in me and then I'm actually consuming it necessarily. But really to go into these different layers, which is also allowing the whole group actually, with having scientists that look at the fungi in a very, very specific way, or not very specific way, they're exploring it, they're trying to understand it also with genomics and all sorts of methodology. Artists working with it very differently. I think I have, for me, it's this network idea, but also how much is also in human interpretation into this, how much is like really reality and biology and then our perception actually. I'm not thinking about, like in very static roles about artists or the scientists. I just think there's more of a protocol in the methodology of scientists, how they have to work. And the artists do it in a very different way. They have also their own methodologies, they have their own questions, but they don't need to stick to very specific roles, which I find extremely liberating, which I find also coming together here in this space in Chile. I think that helps to challenge each other, but also to learn from each other. So maybe like the rigidity, can you say that in English? Yeah, I think so. The rigidity of how maybe scientists sometimes approach this organism in this case is challenged by the artists that are maybe more free to use like an experimental setting, or how to think about this fungi, the kind of questions that are coming up, I think are extremely fruitful for the scientists to encounter. And on the other hand, maybe there's a certain systematic of how scientists work can also be very interesting for artists to push also their methodologies. So I think it's really a two-way dialogue and exchange, and just like opening up new horizons in each other. So I don't know. It's about role. I don't think it's so much about roles. I think when we are sitting in this room together, we are eating together. There is no feeling about, oh, I'm a scientist or I'm an artist, or I don't feel that. And I don't think about that in my sense. I'm here as an individual. Of course, I link, to my practice. I have ideas because of all the discussions. And this is what I think is at the core. This is where the soup, comes together. So we are all contributing to a soup that we can then eat, and there are pieces we like more in there, pieces that we know it's very healthy, and we eat them. And so yeah, it's more kind of this notion I would like to think about with this project. I find the Fungi Cosmology project extremely interesting because it involves 3 very different ecosystems and 3 very different environments and socio-political environments as well. And we actually physically meet in these places. We also do, of course, during the course of these 2 years, we also interact online, which is good and interesting when you also know each other, like when you have the chance to also come together in a room, because it's very, very different if you're physically in a space, when you are actually smelling, when you can touch the environment you're in, when you can feel the people, and so it's just very different spaces. So we actually don't have 3 spaces, we have 4 spaces we are interacting in. And Don Pedro, the driver that drove us here, asked nearly at the end when we arrived here a really key question, asking us, why are you coming all this way to be here? And we were like 8 people in this car, and we were all thinking, yes, this is such a good and such a core question. Why are we coming all this way? Yeah, of course, we could exchange, like we could have done like X zooms, X, Y zooms during the course of the year. But I think specifically, if you are working across also different ways of thinking, different environments, different ecosystems, it's extremely different. It's extremely important for the understanding of the specific environment, which shapes also us as human beings, which then has an influence on our interactions. It's so important that we can meet, and it's so important that we can meet and interact with each other in these specific territories in a way. Because you can smell the fungi, you can see the colors of the fungi, we can smell each other, and we learn about the background, we learn about the history of a place, and we can really sense it with all our senses. And this then shapes and reshapes the way we are thinking about something, because we are confronted with reality. We understand why, you know, like when we are in a space and we see the trees, we can all of a sudden feel why they are like bending always to the same direction, because this strong wind just comes in and in, like speaking of Puerto Yartu now and the Cap Patagonia. So this is really, I think, shaping and shifting also pre-assumptions, perceptions, biases that we have, and allows us to also in a way of like also, you know, like really kind of, you know, also like physically, you know, interlock in a way, and have also very, very pertinent discussions, and where we agree, but we also disagree. But we can understand in the end where everybody is kind of coming from, or what position in a way somebody is speaking, and we can develop an understanding for our different ways of thinking and our different ways of approaching life, basically. And how we deal with the environment.